Hi folks, John Cordisco back again. Round 6 of the second annual Gashimov Memorial in honor of Fugar Gashimov, who passed away about a year and a half ago. Being played in Azerbaijan, his home country. This is a hell of a game. Two players that need no introduction in the chess world. As white, Vladimir Kramnik, former world champion. And black, Fabiano Caruana, Italian-American. Now number 2 in the world on a live rating list. Him and Caro go back and forth. They're like a point away from each other, half a point. So they go back and forth. Fabiano's over 2,800. Not too shabby. Anyway, let's get to it. Knight F3, G6. Interesting. Not a Trumpowski, but kind of close. Kind of a Tory attack, I guess you'd call it. Castles by Caruana. Kramnik goes knight B to D2, D5. So it's starting to look somewhat familiar. I'm not sure on that knight on D2. We'll see how it works out. E3. So now the dark squared bishop for white's outside the pawn chain. Knight comes up. Bishop B2. C5. That's typical stuff. Hoping that white will take to get the knight out. But Kramnik's castle is a B6. A4 by Kramnik, A6, and B4. Now, according to the computer, that's the last book move. Now, I'm sure there are variations above this, but whatever line this is, I'm not familiar with it. That's the last book move. Develops the bishop. And A5, trying to break it up on the queen side a little bit. C takes, B5. Pretty much locks that up. Now, white's got major control over this square, and black has major control over this square. Not as much as white is, though. But knight on D2, we're going to have to see where he goes. Rook to C1, knight E8. It's showing the maneuver that black has to take to get that knight all the way up on D4. Knight to B3. Now the knight's in the proper spot. So that D2 square was the correct square in this line. Knight to D6. Knight E1. Knight goes to C4, right up front and center. Great outpost for that knight. Knight D3. It's like the game of knights today. Rook A7. Interesting. Never would have thought of that move, but computer likes Rook E8. Bishop C6. Not sure on Bishop C6, but 8-6 to kick the bishop. Fabiano decides to go Rook A7. Bishop H4. He moves the bishop before he's chased off. I'm not so sure about that. Not that I'm second guessing Vladimir Kramnik. My God, the guy's a monster. He's former world champion. He just wants the bishop here, apparently. Bishop A8. Bishop F3. Knight F6 to guard the pawn. Queen E2. This is interesting stuff right here. I wasn't sure if that bishop to F3, because of the fact now he can't get rid of that knight on C4, but right now he's not really causing too much problem for white. Knight to E8. Interesting, might have been knight to E4 instead, and then rook FD1. That was the computer's choice. After knight to E8, G4. Interesting. Let's go back here. Another, I shouldn't say awkward move, but interesting move. Knight on B to C5 is the computer's choice, and I think one of us would have put the knight there as well. Decided to go G4. Got the Fritz computer on off screen. It's about a quarter pawn advantage for white, but this is really fascinating. You can see this is going to be a long, drawn-out affair. Knight to D6, bishop G2. He wants to keep the light squared bishop. He wants to move it, I think. He wants to start pushing his pawns. Caruana goes queen to c8. Now the B knight comes up. Another good spot. Black's got a really good posted knight, and so does white. Let's see how they get rid of each other's knights here. Rook e8. Bishop g3. You wanted that pawn move for that reason, I think, to eventually get the bishop there to hit the knight. Queen has to go to d8. So if he takes, later if he takes, this doubles up the pawn. He can't have that. So queen to d8. Rook c to d1. e6. Just to reinforce the d5 pawn. Maybe give his queen a little room too. f3. Stops anything coming to here. Queen e7. He's moved that queen now 3 times. Computer's got it basically dead even. Queen to f2. Kramnik decides to go king to h1. I call that a grandmaster move. Bishop h6. Hitting that pawn twice on e3. He goes knight to e4. Interesting. Interesting. I mean, what the hell would you do here? I mean, in all fairness, all that's come off the board is 2 pawns. For all 32 pieces, there's still 30 of them on the board, and we're on move 27. You can get lost in this mess. Knight to b7. Going to reroute the knight, I think. Knight comes back. Knight to d8. e4. Finally, we get a break. Knight to c6. Finally, a capture. Knight takes b4. D takes. Knight takes. Rook takes. If knight had taken instead, knight to e3 loses the exchange. So rook takes is the correct move. F takes. Now it gives himself an isolated pawn, but white has one too. Now this is what happens sometimes when you have a whole bunch of pieces on move 18 or so. They come off quick. We got quite a clearance here of pieces. So these major pieces, the rooks and the queens, have open space now. But there's really weird pawns for white. Pawn here and pawn here. That's going to be tough to defend. Granted, black's got an isolated e-pawn, but I think he's a lot better shape. And the computer bears that out. It's about a 1.25 advantage for black. Queen to e1. Queen to d8. Going to start putting pressure on white's d-pawn. h4. It's going to open it up a little bit on the king side, get some attacking possibilities going here. Give you an idea about if the knight had taken the pawn. Queen checks. And that's the end. You lose this knight. So those 3 pawns aren't so free. Rook f7. g5. Again, can't take the pawn. So after queen checks, rook f2. Rook takes. You're doomed. g5. Bishop comes back. Man, it's starting to loosen up a little bit, but this is incredibly complicated. I'd be pulling my hair out right now. All kinds of crap going on here. Tons of tactical possibilities. Bishop h3. Hit the pawn again. And now we have an exchange sacrifice. Rook takes f7. Bishop takes e5. White is up the exchange, but black has almost a 2-point advantage. I thought those 2 bishops for white would be worth something, but it seems black's bishops are a lot more effective. Bishop g3 backs off. e4. Just putting it right down his throat. What to do? What to do? Rook to D1. I think Fabiano has him, but got to be careful. Kramnik's a monster. He can slip out of almost anything. Bishop D5. Give you an idea. If he had taken bishop checks, king H8, D5, and that really puts white at the advantage. After bishop D5, bishop E4, now the pawn takes, queen F2. Man, oh man, oh man. All kinds of tactics going on here, at least potential of them. You have to be very careful. Queen takes A5. Now, very rarely you'll see this. Look at those two passers for black. This is Vladimir Kramnik. This is no chump. For those of you keeping score, black has a knight and 2 pawns for white's rook. But it's a 2-point advantage now for black. I mean, it's tough. Not as good would have been knight takes. After pawn takes, rook takes, queen C5. And that takes all the black's advantage away. It's basically a draw after this. Believe it or not. After queen takes, bishop G4, rook F8. It's got to guard that pawn. Again, if knight had taken, pawn takes, bishop C4, E6, bishop takes, queen takes. And believe it or not, this craziness is dead drawn. After rook to F8, rook to D3, and Kramnik's just struggling to keep himself going, which is very unusual. Queen B4, bishop G3, 2.5-point advantage for black now. Those A and B pass pawns are just too much. H5, pawn takes en passant. Those that were wondering about bishop takes F3. After rook takes, knight D2. Oops. That's even worse. After G takes, bishop takes, and this is where Kramnik stumbles. He's in a crummy position anyway. Queen to C2 is basically the best the computer can come up with. He goes king to H2, and just like that, it goes up to over a 3.5-point advantage. I mean, almost everything black is doing is winning. Knight to D2, hitting the rook. Rook has to move. And the rooks can't connect to protect each other anymore. Rook takes maybe was the last gap, and after bishop takes, rook D1, but still, it's doomed. After rook D1, knight E4. Queen has to move. Now knight takes. It's king takes G3 is the obvious move, but he takes this now. It's a 14-point advantage. When the hell did you ever see a 14-point advantage against Vladimir Kramnik? If he had taken with a king after queen to D6 check, king H3, you're still doomed. Bishop E4, just horrendous. Bishop takes. Queen E1. Queen checks. King H8. I mean, look at this craziness. Bishop takes. Go to the computer, it's mate in 5. Rook F2 check. King H3. Rook F1. King G4. Rook F4 check. Forcing the king back. And this is where Kramnik says, you know what, that's enough. I've had enough. Give you an idea. After the king takes the rook, queen F2 check, king H3, then the rook takes the pawn. Typical mating pattern there with a queen and rook. Anyway, folks, that's the only decisive game from round 6. And a hell of a decisive game it was. Very rarely we see Kramnik back on his heels like that. So there it is. More games to come in the Gashimov Memorial. I hope you enjoyed this one. I want you all to remember, if you think chess is just a game, you're not playing it right. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.